Historians have written hundreds of interesting biographies of Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, but historians have for some reason avoided any serious direct comparison for the two presidents. The Civil War must not only be analyzed at the point of views of the North and South as a whole, but the leaders who led their respective sides. The objectives Lincoln and Davis were trying to accomplish are different. Davis was trying to establish a separate republic. To enable this, he had to defeat the invading armies of the North and establish the Confederacy's legitimacy in the world and his own people. On the other hand, Lincoln was trying to preserve the Union. Similar to Davis, Lincoln had two primary challenges. First, he had to invade and militarily overwhelm the South. Second, he had to maintain a Union worthy of saving. Abraham Lincoln did not consider people who allowed human slavery as part of the Union.
Davis's goal was to convince the people of the Confederacy that God supported their cause and the founding on slavery was good. If he could not convince the people, then his people would be forced to accept that the separation from the North and a nation based on slavery was not justified. So Davis's failure to even acknowledge that slavery was important was one of his downfalls of his leadership.
Jefferson Davis believed that the northern states abolished slavery because they did not require slaves to make much economic benefit. The smaller amount of black people in the North led him to believing that emancipation would not free many slaves if it was only restricted to the North. Jefferson owned slaves and spent his career in the Senate defending slaveholders. Interestingly, Davis did not ever acknowledge that the South was a nation based on the supposed truth that black men were inferior to white men. He did not allow himself to believe that slavery was an important issue in the war. Jefferson promoted the morality of slavery through using Southern ministers to motivate the soldiers. This tactic failed miserably because the ministers were not instructed in how to have religious leadership. This led to some ministers resorting to using fear techniques. Though the ministers were placed in order to promote morale, they had the opposite effect. Lincoln successfully used religious leaders to reinforce his policies. He also supported civilian organizations such as the U.S. Christian Commission. This support convinced civilians to generally support his cause and the presence of chaplains in the army. Early in the war, Lincoln insisted that every regiment have a chaplain of a Christian denomination and did what he could to assist the civilian organizations such as the U.S. Christian Commission in evangelizing and ministering to the troops. This greatly increased the morale of the Northern troops. Davis frequently had neither the patience nor the inclination to reconcile differences with political foes. His wife, Verena, summed up Davis's political skills by saying, "He did not know the art of the politician and would not practice them if he understood." She also said, "As a better manager, I know I could succeed." Davis was unable to articulate effectively the moral justification for a separate union. According to one historian, Davis never said anything people could remember. Davis also procrastinated on the idea of enlisting slaves.
If slaves could make good soldiers, our whole theory of slavery is wrong.
To successfully transform the purpose of the war, Lincoln's timing was critical. He countermanded Union Major General John C. Fremont in Missouri and David Hunter in South Carolina's actions, explaining that it was essential that they not alienate the border states too soon. Lincoln successfully convinced those that were indifferent to the moral benefit of freeing the slaves by persuading them that the black soldiers would be able to share in the sacrifice and hardship of the war, removing a source of strength from the Confederacy and lessening the cost in white soldiers' lives. He also displayed transformational leadership when he convinced others that freeing the slaves was the moral thing to do. As a result, most of the North supported the Emancipation Proclamation and later the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, freeing all slaves when Lincoln pushed it through Congress. At the beginning of the war, Lincoln was content to leave slavery alone in the South and have the southern seceded states come back to the Union with slavery intact. He was willing to do this in spite of the fact that he hated slavery, an institution that he said had the power to make people miserable. The Southern armies had an advantage because they were fighting for concrete reasons such as independence and protecting their own homes. For Lincoln, it was much harder to maintain Northern focus on the war because for the Northern armies, it was based on a more abstract purpose. They were fighting for maintaining the Union and freeing the slaves. Despite this, Lincoln successfully pushed his armies toward victory through establishing these principles.
Two leaders. I believe that Abraham Lincoln was the better leader. This is because he can motivate his soldiers to fight better than Davis. Also, Lincoln was a much better public speaker, that he was able to inspire the people to support his cause. Lincoln was able to transform the purpose of the war into one being about the unification of the Union to one being about slavery. But one must still take into account the support of their respective parties. Lincoln's Republican Party, although they did not agree on certain ideas that Lincoln pushed forth, came together and supported Lincoln because they were all united against the Democratic Party. Davis, on the other hand, did not have a good party backing because of the great internal struggles within his party, because Davis did not resolve the conflicts with political foes.